Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's good to see the government continue to audition for the role of opposition over there. Now, every day this spring, Mr. Speaker, we've asked this tired and out-of-touch government to cut the gas tax to give Saskatchewan families a break. Yesterday, we learned that a private company, a Sask Party donor, secured a $6 million sole source contract for private surgeries. This, after former Sask Party Cabinet Minister Kevin Doherty was hired as their lobbyist. Mr. Speaker, it makes you wonder, is this what Saskatchewan people are going to have to do to get a break on the fuel tax? Do they have to hire Kevin Doherty as a lobbyist to get this Premier's attention?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, over the last number of years, and in particular since COVID, Mr. Speaker, this government has been looking to utilize all of the tools and all of the methods that we have to reduce our surgical wait times. Mr. Speaker, surgical wait times have ballooned since the pandemic across the nation, and Saskatchewan has been no exception. Through an ambitious HHR plan, most ambitious in Canada, Mr. Speaker, we're seeing those wait times come down in general about 23%, Mr. Speaker. Part of that plan is utilizing private surgeries, building on the success that we've had in delivering 160,000 publicly funded private surgeries across the province over the last number of years, Mr. Speaker. ClearPoint Surgical Centres was one of that we used to reduce some of that wait time, Mr. Speaker. Yes, they are represented by a former MLA, Mr. Speaker. Associated Radiologists is also a publicly funded private deliverer that we use to the tune of, I believe, budgeted about $22 billion this past year, Mr. Speaker. And they are also represented by a former MLA in this House, former Leader of the Opposition, Cam Broughton.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, they really want the job of opposition. Oh, they'll get their chance. But right now, Saskatchewan has the worst wait times for hip and knee replacement in the country. And that is the record of this tired and out-of-touch government. But instead of focusing on what matters to Saskatchewan people, you see this Sask Party signing sole source contracts with their friends and their donors. How does the Premier justify these inside deals that benefit the Sask Party donors while Saskatchewan people are struggling just to pay their bills?
Recognize the Premier.
Speaker, there's a number of entities and individuals, Mr. Speaker, that are on the lobbyist registry discussing, and not only discussing solutions that they might have with the government, but I would suspect that they're also discussing some of those opportunities and solutions with the opposition as well, Mr. Speaker. We are looking at innovative ways to reduce our surgical wait time that will include expanding the publicly funded, privately delivered surgeries. Mr. Speaker, if they don't want the answer, Mr. Speaker, they should not ask the question. Mr. Speaker, if that includes for a finite number of surgeries, if they can be delivered in Calgary to lower our wait list, we're going to do that, Mr. Speaker. That includes engaging with Mr. Broughton, Mr. Speaker, and Associated Radiologists and providing $22 million of publicly funded money, Mr. Speaker, to deliver those private surgeries, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of Saskatchewan people. So my question is this. 161,000 publicly funded, privately delivered surgeries have been offered to and received by Saskatchewan residents, many of them by Associated Radiologists, some of them now by ClearPoint Surgical Centre, Mr. Speaker. Is it the view of the opposition that they would remove all of those 160,000 surgeries in the province?
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker is so eager to ask the questions. You'll get your chance. Don't worry. But yesterday, we saw the Minister of Health say in this Assembly that there was no sole source contract for surgeries. He said there was an RFP and everything was above board. The NDP is just grasping at straws, Mr. Speaker. Then that minister went out into the rotunda. What did he say out there? He said he got it all wrong, that there was a sole source deal with the Sask Party donor. What does the Premier think about this mix-up? Shouldn't Saskatchewan people be able to expect their ministers to get it right the first time?
Recognize the Premier.
We are getting it right, Mr. Speaker. We're reducing the surgical wait time in the province by 23%. We're doing that, Mr. Speaker, by utilizing all of the opportunities that we have to offer surgeries to Saskatchewan people. That means publicly funded, privately delivered surgeries within the province, publicly funded, privately delivered surgeries outside of the province, much like the government, the NDP government in British Columbia is doing, but they're sending them out of country, Mr. Speaker. We're sending them to a neighbouring province in a much smaller number, Mr. Speaker, and we are investing heavily in our publicly funded surgeries, Mr. Speaker, with the most ambitious health human resource plan in the nation, Mr. Speaker. Yes, there are lobbyists that are lobbying government and opposition in that publicly funded private surgical area, Mr. Speaker, but also on the lobbyist registry are entities like CUPE and SUN, and those that are working strictly in the publicly funded, publicly delivered healthcare scope, Mr. Speaker, some of which are going to be working in the Urgent Care Centre on North Albert Street here as well, as we drastically expand the services available to Saskatchewan people. So what we're seeing today is more services, Mr. Speaker, in the publicly funded, publicly delivered, more surgeries and diagnostics in the publicly funded, privately delivered, Mr. Speaker, and we're seeing more people work in our healthcare system across the board.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
There might be a little more to correct in that answer, Mr. Speaker, but Saskatchewan people expect their leaders to be honest and forthright. They expect the Premier to hold his ministers responsible. Is the Premier okay with the fact that the Health Minister came into the Rotunda yesterday, or into the Assembly yesterday, and said one thing and then said something completely different in the Rotunda? What does that say about this Premier's leadership?
Recognize the Premier.
What this Premier's leadership, and I would say more astutely the Health Minister's leadership that we've had over the course of the last number of years, Mr. Speakers, means this, that in that public sphere of offering healthcare services to Saskatchewan people, we have today offered, as I've said many times on the floor of this Assembly, offered 1,097 Canadian nursing graduates jobs in the Saskatchewan Health Authority. Mr. Speaker, of that, 831, we are up 831 nurses across the province today, Mr. Speaker. So the question across the floor often is, what is the net increase this year in nursing, Mr. Speaker? It's up 831. Since 2018, Mr. Speaker, which seems to be a number they like to look at, we're up 2,165. That's an 18% increase in people working in the nurses working in our community in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to nurse practitioners, since 2018, we're up 35%. Those are real facts, Mr. Speaker. Those are coming from the College of Registered Nurses, Mr. Speaker. No, they weren't coming from Cam Broughton. He's with Associated Radiologists, Mr. Speaker. They're coming from the College of Registered Nurses, Mr. Speaker. Up over the last 5-6 years, Mr. Speaker, 18% in our nursing complement across this province, up 35% with our nurse practitioners. Again, Mr. Speaker, in addition to how we are reducing our surgical wait times, it's these health ministers and the previous health ministers that are utilizing every opportunity they have, even innovative opportunities, to serve Saskatchewan residents better.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan people deserve so much better than this tired and out-of-touch government. Let's recap. We see a minister coming into this Assembly making statements that are completely inconsistent with the facts, all in an effort to defend the indefensible. A sole source, sweetheart deal with a private surgery company that donates to the Sask Party and has a former Sask Party cabinet minister as a lobbyist. How can the Premier be satisfied with the fact that his health minister came into this Assembly and said one thing and said something completely different out in the Rotunda?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, most certainly this health minister, both these health ministers and previous health ministers, continue to look for every opportunity that we have to serve the people of Saskatchewan better, as does all of those that are, Mr. Speaker, that are in leadership spaces at the SHA, and all of those across the province working within our Saskatchewan Health Authority. Mr. Speaker, as I said, they are looking at things that, quite frankly, the NDP won't look at, is publicly funded, privately delivered surgeries and diagnostics, Mr. Speaker. By this very metric, is the NDP saying that those 161,000 surgeries that have been offered to Saskatchewan people don't matter? are all of those publicly funded private diagnostics, Mr. Speaker, some offered by Associated Radiologists, that is, again, Mr. Speaker, has on their staff, Mr. Cam Broughton, who is leader of the opposition for the NDP. Should we be removing them from the procurement opportunities to offer services to the people of Saskatchewan? I think not, Mr. Speaker. Most certainly.
How can you guys hear with your mouths always flapping?
Mr. Speaker, what these health ministers are going to continue to do is continue to take action when it comes to recruiting people into our publicly funded, publicly delivered healthcare system, and we have over 1,000 nurses, Mr. Speaker, that have been recruited into that system just over the course of the last year. What these health ministers are going to continue to do is to look at new and innovative ways to deliver healthcare, to reduce our surgical wait time, which is down 23%, to Mr. Speaker, to staff, innovative ways to deliver health care on the mental health care side as well, like our urgent care centres. They've been doing that, and they're going to continue to do that.
Recognized member from Regina Alfredstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier can huff and puff. He can throw out some numbers on surgeries. Worst in the nation for hip and knee surgery waitlist before this sole source contract. Worst in the nation after this sole source contract, Mr. Speaker. This tired and out-of-touch government signed a sole source deal with a Sask Party donor to provide hip and knee surgeries out of a private clinic in Calgary. When we asked the Minister of Health about this yesterday, he got rather defensive, personal attacks. He attacked our credibility, but he ended up shredding his own. Does the Minister of Health think it's acceptable to come into this assembly and say things that are completely inconsistent with the facts?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Health. Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday in the media, I corrected that the short-term contract for hip and knee surgeries was not RFP'd, Mr. Speaker. A bit of history. In early May of 2022, the Ministry of Health reached out to a number of private surgical companies across Western Canada and Ontario. This was something that other provinces were doing as well, Mr. Speaker, to look at other solutions to help address their backlog of surgeries. Mr. Speaker, there was only one provider, ClearPoint in Calgary, that was able to provide this short-term overnight stays for hip and knee replacement, Mr. Speakers. Now, further than that, Mr. Speaker, in January of 2023, and this is important, ministry officials from the Ministry of Health consulted with the SAS Builds and Procurement Chief Procurement Officer, and Mr. Speaker, the Chief Procurement Officer did advise that this initiative would fall under an exemption from procurement trade agreements due to the nature of service requested, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Alfredstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, he made a few phone calls. Mr. Speaker, Sask Party members have no respect for these institutions anymore, whether it's slouching in their chairs, muttering blah, blah, blah when we're talking about healthcare closures, or making statements that are completely inconsistent with the facts. They show day in, day out that it's time for a change in this province and that this Sask Party government, this tired and out-of-touch government, has got to go. The Minister of Health signed a sweetheart deal, a sole source contract with a SAS Party donor, and when pressed for answers, made statements that are demonstrably incompatible with the facts. If he can't keep his facts straight about his friends and donors, what else is he getting wrong on this file?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of things that are wrong, the Minister of Health does not sign contracts. The Minister of Health, we don't do that. The ministry officials, the Ministry of Health would engage with organizations like this, but it's not the minister, it's not myself, sits down and negotiates contracts. So the member opposite is incorrect in that statement, Mr. Speaker, and that's why she sits in opposition and will continue to sit in opposition for a long, long time, Mr. Speaker. This government is pursuing all options to improve access for joint replacement surgeries for people in this province. As the Premier detailed, the Ministry of Health, in this particular instance, reached an agreement with a chartered surgical facility to accommodate up to 250 publicly funded joint replacement surgeries for eligible Saskatchewan patients. And Mr. Speaker, as the Premier talked about, we have made record investments into publicly funded surgeries in this province, $670 million in the new budget, an increase over the previous year's budget, and we're also utilizing other initiatives as well Health, such as this one, in order to provide even more people with the surgeries they need, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, these guys love to take credit for everything, but apparently they're responsible for nothing. Mr. Speaker, in the rotunda yesterday, the Minister of Health seemed to imply that he had no choice but to sole source this contract to a Sask Party donor with a former Sask Party finance minister for a lobbyist. Newsflash to the minister, he had a choice. Instead of handing a $6 million contract to a company that donates generously to his party, he could have put that money into building up the public system here at home and get more scans for more Saskatchewan people, building capacity here. Why does the Sask Party always find a way to help their friends and donors get ahead and leave Saskatchewan people holding the bag?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite, once again, not paying attention, not listening to the answers, not listening to the budget, and not recognizing that there continues to be significant investments into health care in this province, Mr. Speaker. And we've talked about the investments and the additional funding going in towards building surgery capacity, more funding for more scans. There's additional funding in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, to build capacity and conduct more MRIs in this province, more CT scans in this province, Mr. Speaker. But in addition to that, we know that we have to get people the surgeries they need, which is why this is one of the reasons that we are looking at all of our options that we have within our province, and also for, in this case, patients who've been waiting for 24 months as a result of the backlog that built up during the pandemic, which happened right across this country, Mr. Speaker. And for the patients that have been waiting for these hip and knee surgeries, this is important work. This is their lives that are important to them, and surgeries that need to be completed. And Mr. Speaker, I would say, as the Premier pointed out, there are 161,000 surgeries that have been provided by a privately delivered but publicly funded options in this province, Mr. Speaker, and these are important to get done, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, these patients are waiting a long time. In fact, they're waiting longer than anywhere else in Canada, and that's why the official opposition expects results. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the minister said that Kevin Doherty, the former Sask Party finance minister, had never met with him on this project. He said, I quote from Hansard, that Mr. Doherty did not lobby on this, was not involved in this particular RFP, end quote. We know now there is no RFP, and the health minister was wrong. There are multiple entries of Kevin Doherty lobbying on surgical policies with this minister when this deal was being made. So did Mr. Doherty, to the health minister, did Mr. Doherty lobby on this sole source deal that saw his client get paid $6 million by the taxpayers of Saskatchewan, or not? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I meet with many people, and I've talked about that in this chamber before. I meet with many people. I meet with groups. I meet with organizations. I meet with municipal leaders. I meet with healthcare foundations. I meet with frontline healthcare providers, Mr. Speaker. I meet with patients, such as I did yesterday, Mr. Speaker. And there are a number of groups, and the Premier talked about this a little bit, but there are a number of groups that are registered with the Registrar of Lobbyists to meet with us, to meet with the opposition, Mr. Speaker, such as the Saskatchewan Medical Association, such as the Saskatchewan Union of Nurses, the Canadian Red Cross, the Canadian Cancer Society, Canadian Diabetes Association. These are all groups that I have also met with as well, Mr. Speaker. And they meet with us to talk about healthcare in Saskatchewan, to talk about what is some of the challenges that we are facing, but also to look at creative ideas and look for solutions to the challenges that we face to continue to build healthcare in this province so the people of Saskatchewan can have the best possible healthcare, Mr. Speaker. The members opposite, they want us to consult. They want us to engage with people on one hand, but on the other hand, they say we shouldn't be doing that, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to do what's right for the people of this province.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Brad Wall promised that the Sask Party would be the most open and accountable government in Saskatchewan history. They're not what they used to be, Mr. Speaker. They don't even try anymore. Let's look at the facts. There is entry after entry after entry in the lobbyist registry of Kevin Doherty, lobbying that government on behalf of their Sask Party donor to, quote, work with the Ministry of Health to assist in the surgical backlog. This is a great deal for the Sask Party. This is a great deal for their donors, but it's a terrible deal for the people of Saskatchewan, worst in the nation results, who are left to wait longer and longer, often in pain, and then they're left to pick up the tab. Who should Saskatchewan believe on this matter, Mr. Speaker? The Minister of Health or Kevin Doherty's own filings with the lobbyist registry?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would hope that the member opposite is prepared to make those allegations outside the chamber, and I would encourage her to do so, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has made significant progress in reducing the surgical backlog in Saskatchewan by utilizing a number of initiatives, including utilizing private surgical providers. As of December 2023, Mr. Speaker, this past December, there were 27,000 patients waiting for surgery in Saskatchewan, over 8,100 less patients than in November of 2021, or a decrease of 23%. Members opposite, they want us to shut down our publicly funded, privately delivered services that would deny immediate relief to people right across this province who need knee surgeries, who need hip surgeries, Mr. Speaker. 161,000 residents that since this program started a number of years ago, 161,000 residents of Saskatchewan who have benefited from this program, and they're grateful for the ability to get these surgeries done, Mr. Speaker. 161,000 patients, Mr. Speaker, that the NDP would deny service to.
Recognize the member from Sask Rivers.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to put the crime rate into perspective for this government. The per capita vehicle theft rate in Prince Albert is 4 times higher than Toronto. 4 times. Yet this government continually fails to act. Where is the will? Why isn't the Premier declaring war on crime? Or should we do what they're doing in Ontario and tell residents that they should leave their car keys outside for the thieves? Can the government state what are they actually doing to tackle crime today? Not just some line item in a budget. Their families, their neighbours, their communities are all affected by this. We don't need more speeding cameras that rack up fines on law-abiding citizens, Mr. Speaker. We need leadership that has the will to end the lawlessness and violence. I'm asking the government, what are they doing to end the crime epidemic?
Recognize the Minister of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very proud of what our law enforcement is doing. Our municipal, our First Nation, and of course our RCMP and law enforcement are doing with our crime reduction teams, Mr. Speaker, across Saskatchewan, and newly implemented Marshal Service that's going to be up and running next year, Mr. Speaker, which I know the opposition is against. Mr. Speaker, I can't understand for the life of me why they would want to have less police officers in Saskatchewan. We have a new deal with the RCMP.
Whoa. Whoa. You didn't ask a question. You can get up after.
Come on, you guys. I can wait, Mr. Speaker.
Come on, you guys.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the Marshal Service that we've been able to implement to be able to help reduce crime, not just in rural Saskatchewan, in northern Saskatchewan, and assist our municipalities in making sure that they have the proper resources to be able to work against the people that are committing crimes in this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatchewan Rivers.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not interested in some line item on a budget. What are they doing? Their own law enforcement are at Citizens on Patrol meetings begging for help. A minister from this government attended a Citizens on Patrol meeting and told his residents he had no solutions for them. He said he wasn't going to go back to Regina and ask for more money until the public put together a plan for him. He told them they knew how to contact him because his phone number was on the radio. Is this the kind of leadership this government is proud of? Is this the kind of leadership that will solve the crime problem?
Recognize the Minister of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And directly to the question, what we're doing is we're investing $228 million to the RCMP and the Provincial Police Service Agreement, Mr. Speaker. That's the investment that we're doing. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, we're also investing again in our Marshal Service, which I know the opposition and that member specifically does not support, even though it would benefit specifically into her community. Mr. Speaker, we're very proud. I just attended this morning the RPS luncheon for long service, and I'm attending this afternoon to be able to thank those police officers, to thank those frontline officers who are out there making sure that our communities are safe. Mr. Speaker, this is something that is critically important to our community, something that the Premier has identified to myself and to this Cabinet that we should be able to make sure that our communities are safe. That means our municipalities, our northern communities, Mr. Speaker, our agricultural areas, Mr. Speaker.
Nadine.
This government will continue to invest within law enforcement and will continue to work with frontline providers to make sure that those services are properly funded. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Government Deputy House Leader.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Please state your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, during a question period, the member from Regina Lakeview and the Leader of the Opposition said, people expect their leaders to be honest and forthright. And what she was saying indirectly was that the Premier was not being honest. I believe you have clearly ruled on this, and I would ask that the Leader of the Opposition withdraw and apologize.
Recognize the Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I will again state what the Leader of the Opposition said, as had been repeated by the Government Deputy House Leader. Saskatchewan people expect their leaders to be honest and forthright, period. That was all she said. That should not be a controversial statement, but apparently government finds that offensive. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that you find that that point of order is not well taken.
I'll take it under advisement.